One of the things that I have enjoyed acquiring over the years are languages and accents. Ever since I was small, I was imitating different sounds that I would hear from different people. In the suburb where we grew up, if I heard someone speaking in a different way, I would I would just start trying to talk like them in public. And I would get in trouble from my parents who who told me very early on, you're not allowed to do that. Well, this sort of instinct never left me. When I heard a, an accent that was foreign or different, I was just intrigued to try it out myself. I don't know where that comes from, but it is a fascination that actually ended up helping me later in my life when I started learning different languages. Learning a language for me is something that it's so challenging. I think anybody that has had to learn a new language can relate to that, but it's also fascinating because it's not just grammar and vocabulary that you're learning. So much of using a language is using your ears to really listen. And today I want to share with you some tips if you're learning a new language, or if you're just interested in accents. So my training, my informal training with accents, as I said, started when I was small because I lived in a very multicultural part of Toronto. I lived in the suburbs with people from all over the world speaking English with many different accents. What is an accent? I want to share my theory with you. It's not really a theory because it's true. An accent is when a particular language is spoken with the inflections and the mouth placement using another language. So, the best way to sort of describe this to you is to show you. Maintenant, je parle en français. Right now, I'm going to speak in French. In French. Et quand je parle en français, j'utilise ma bouche ici, à parler en français. And if I take the same place where I'm speaking French, right here, and I say, and now I'm speaking English, but I'm using the same place in my mouth to speak English. That is an accent. And so you can do it with so many different languages. Now, so now I'm doing an accent that's an Indian accent, but I'm speaking like a North Indian. And the place that I'm using to speak English is the exact placement in my mouth that I would be using to speak Hindi. இப்போ நான் தமிழில் பேச போகிறேன். நான் இப்போ தமிழில் பேச போகிறேன்டா இங்கே இந்த வாயில பேச போகிறேன். Now I'm taking the exact same place and transferring it over to English. I was speaking Tamil and now I'm speaking English, but I'm using the exact same place in my mouth, using my tongue the same way to speak English. That's an accent. And this started as a funny thing for me, and then there was a point in my life where it became actually very important for a job. When I was shooting Mean Girls, I was a teenager, and there was a line in the movie when early on in shoot, I think it was the first day of shooting, we shot the scene where I walk up to Lindsay Lohan and ask her to join the math club, and I say, you should think about joining. You should think about joining. Then they said cut, and then this lady walked over to me that was the script supervisor, and she said, sorry, can you say, you're saying that like a Canadian. And I said, I'm saying what like a Canadian? You should think about. She said, you're saying about. And she said, you need to say about. And I told her that I couldn't hear a difference. And then she said, don't worry about it. We'll send you to a dialogue coach. And we moved on. So the next day, or the next week, or whatever, very, very soon after that, they sent me to a man named David Smukler. And David Smukler was a professor at York University who specialized in speech and dialect coaching. Now, this man, my time with him, I went to him, I think 3 times for Mean Girls. It was fascinating. He taught me how to speak like an American. And David said that when we speak English, when we speak any language really, but particularly Canadians and Americans and British people, we're using a certain part of our mouth. So Canadians speak with the middle of the mouth right here. And I'm going to exaggerate it right now, but basically the place that you hear it is in all of the vowels. If I don't open my mouth and I use the middle of my mouth to say words, especially these are the words that are the giveaway, OU words. House, outside, mouth. Mouth. Okay? Middle of the mouth is what most Canadians use. And I'll speak very quickly now, and I'm speaking like a Canadian, and I'm using the middle of my mouth, and you would hear it in a word like outside or house. And he said, Americans, the American accent utilizes the back of the mouth, not mouth, mouth. And he goes, ow. Say ow. O-W, ow. Now say mouth, mouth. So I learned within this week, it was not, for filming Mean Girls, I had to say, you should think about joining, not you should think about joining. Now, back of the mouth, American, middle of the mouth, Canadian. And now if I only use the very front of my mouth to form all of the vowel sounds, and I'm using right here, that's a British accent. So it really becomes geographical in the mouth. And it was so much easier for me to understand how to do an accent when I realized that all I have to do is place all of the vowels and really my speech in a particular part of my mouth. So that's the beginning of it. That was the beginning of pulling apart an accent. And that blew my mind. So when I moved to New York 11 years ago, I stopped speaking like a Canadian and I started speaking like an American because I knew how. So right now I'm speaking like an American, and many people might not even notice, but they would notice. The Americans noticed when I was speaking like a Canadian. They would say, "You're not from here. Where are you from?" So I wanted to go unnoticed. I went back to David Smukler when I read Life of Pi. The heater's on. I need to turn off the heater. It's gonna make noise. Shh, you noisy old heater. I went back to David Smukler when I started chasing after the role of Life of Pi, when they were turning that book into a movie. I dropped out of university. I went to South India, to Pondicherry, where the book takes place, to do research. And one of the main things I wanted to learn in Pondicherry was the authentic South Indian accent. And I have often been asked to use an Indian accent for auditions. Like, I've had dozens, if not hundreds, of auditions over the last 20 years when I've had to go in and use an Indian accent. And the Indian accent to most casting directors is just an Indian accent. It's like talking like this, and I can talk like this, and I would know that they're not going to say anything if I talk like this. But I knew that there is a difference between the different regions of India and those different regions and how they speak English. There's also not only a difference in the actual details of the accent that are connected to the native language, but there's also an attitude. So right now I'm speaking with the air of a Bollywood movie star. I've watched many interviews with Bollywood movie stars. They're typically they're affected by the British English, and there's an aspect of the accent that is very different. They're sort of self-effacing in a certain way where they put themselves down, but there's an arrogance behind it, and It always comes across when I watch these interviews and I think, wow, that's a very particular type of Indian accent. It was very different when I'm speaking like this. This is the South Indian accent, where the accent is connected to the language Tamil, but it's also a very different mental attitude. So I knew this, and I couldn't do this back then. So I went to David Smukler, and I asked him, like, how do I figure out how to speak like someone from Pondicherry? And he's the one that revealed to me that an accent is really based on your native language, where you're using your mouth to speak your native language, and then shifting it over to speak another language, but keeping the same placement in your mouth. So I learned to do an authentic Pondicherry or an authentic South Indian accent with David's help and with recordings from Pondicherry. I actually brought them back, went and visited David again, played them to him, and again, fascinating stuff. Where all of this comes into play for anyone learning a language, like this is all sort of fun. You know, I'd really like to go in and out of different accents because I feel like they're different personalities. Like right now, I'm just going into the headspace of someone that's sort of loose and likes to have a lot of fun, maybe really thinks they know what they're talking about, but they really don't. I don't know. I just pull. These are my characters, and I don't know where they come from, but it's fun. It's fun to visit different places. It's fun to visit a different place, bring a person out of the closet, bring them into here, put them back. Bye bye, goodbye, go away. You know what I mean? So, my friends and my family, they know this is what I do. But where this becomes serious and actually very useful is when you're learning a new language. And for me, all of this fun playing around with accents has taught me so much about learning a language. It has mainly taught me when you learn a new language, you can't speak that language using the same placement of where you speak your native language. So the first place that I really was able to apply this was when I lived in Germany. I lived in Germany for 2 years, and I was determined to learn how to speak German. And as I was learning German, I forced myself to be around German-speaking people, and when they would offer to speak English, they would say, "Oh, Rajiv, you don't understand, shall we speak in English?" And I would say, "No, please speak in German." And somehow I learned how to speak German. My grammar is not great. My vocabulary is extremely limited, but I will say that my strength is how I sound. Because when I'm speaking German, I'm not thinking about English. And I also know, don't speak German with my American or Canadian accent. Ich kann nicht auf Deutsch sprechen und das Klinge ist etwas anderes. That's me speaking German with a Canadian or an American accent. Wenn ich rede auf Deutsch, ich muss auf Deutsch denken und auch das gibt etwas anderes. Ich bin keine kanadische oder amerikanische. Ich bin jetzt echt eine Deutsche. Und das ist ganz, ganz wichtig. So, I've really learned, you're learning language, you have to hear. You really have to hear how it sounds. And then in the early days of learning a language, you imitate their accent. You this is what I do, because I'm very good at mimicking and imitating. I would imitate them. So even if I was saying something and I knew the grammar was off or I was saying the wrong words, I would at least try to sound like them. And there comes this moment when the grammar's coming, the vocabulary is correct, and now you have three things. You have the grammar, the vocabulary, and the sound. And the sound is so important. If I spoke German like a British person, Ich gehe like what I should do is really start with a British accent in English und dann ich spreche jetzt auf Deutsch, aber mit einem englischen Akzent. Ou je peux parler en français maintenant et puis je parle français maintenant, mais maintenant ich spreche auf Deutsch mit einem Akzent française. So I'm so aware of this that it has become something that I really pay attention to. You can't, if you really want to sound like a native speaker, you have to remember, do not speak the language in the same place that you speak your native language. I was in Italy last summer for 6 weeks, and then I was there again in this September for a month. And this time I really tried to learn more Italian. So I made a friend, the bookbinder, Marco, and Marco and I hung out regularly. And Marco would say, shall we talk in English? And I would say, no, please, let's speak solo in Italiano. And Marco would correct me. I asked him to correct me if I was saying incorrect things, but as I was learning words and phrases, I was really conscious of the sound. Parliamo in Italiano, and like, I don't know, these things, they do help. But at this point in my life, this is the joy of learning a new language for me, is that it's the opportunity to become much more a part of that place and culture. And here in New York, because it's so multicultural here as well, travelers and tourists, or people that have moved here from overseas, I'm always curious when I hear a little accent and I can't place where it's from. Or there was a year that I worked at a coffee shop, speaking of, so good. Sometimes there would be someone in line, they would come up to the cash and they would order their drink. And I would go, oh, kommen Sie aus Deutschland? Do you come from Germany? And every now and then they were taken aback, and they were also kind of offended, I could tell. And they would say in German or English, oh, how did you know I came from Germany? And I would say, oh, I heard a little tiny accent. And I could see from the reaction in their face that didn't usually happen. And I think they were taken aback or a little embarrassed, or they didn't like the fact that their English had a detectable accent. And maybe these people, like, they were business people and they had worked very hard to rid themselves of an accent, but I will say I'm really good. Like, I can hear the tiniest tell that there's an accent from somewhere, like sniffing it out. And with Germans, one of the things that they'll be speaking English like this, and they'll say sort of certain things, and then the usual slip is they go yeah and okay, but yeah and okay, but, and it's the yeah that usually does it, because we say yeah, Y-E-A-H, but their word for yes is J-A, yeah. So not getting rid of the slight difference between yeah and yeah, and keeping yeah, and they do this yeah and okay, but with this choppy sort of inflection, yeah and okay, but, and we go to the store and then we're going to buy the groceries and everything was supposed to be on sale, and yes, yeah, okay, but I don't like, huh? Gotcha. So I stopped doing that. I was just so intrigued to speak some German again here in New York when I met someone who was German, and if I could tell that they were from Germany, it was an opportunity to kind of speak German to them or practice. And I stopped doing that because I did realize for some people they just didn't like the fact that there was something detectable. So this video also applies to people like that. If you're in a place where you're working very hard to learn the language and you would like to speak the language at the level of a native speaker, you can do your work with the grammar and the vocabulary, but a huge part of really going unnoticed as not being a native speaker is every single part of the sound. And I think for me, I don't really at this point analyze the sound from the outside. It comes from here. Like, I lived in Germany and I understood the people and I made friends with them and I got to really know them. And it was the same in Italy. And now, für mich, Deutsch, es ist nicht nur die Klinge. Es ist etwas drinnen. Something inside. And that is also the same with the accent. You know, this Bollywood movie star that's a little sort of, they're always just so, you know, it's so lighthearted and it's so airy and it's just so nice and beautiful flowers. And, you know, I'm not really good at anything else. Like, you know, they put themselves down, but it's so, there's always this hoity-toity arrogance, and I hear it, you know, and I see it in the face and I can detect, like, so, that instinct that I've always had, even as a kid, to mimic, I think it came from, I need to do it. I would do it with Chinese people when I was really small, and my mom would have to cover my mouth because we would go to these markets and people would be speaking in Cantonese very loudly, and then I would just start doing it. I mean, I wasn't speaking Cantonese, but I would look up and just start making those sounds, and my parents were mortified. But it was always in there. I just wanted to feel what that sounds so different, and why, like, where is that coming from? Let me try to make that sound and see how it feels. That's never left me. So there's some stuff about languages and accents for you, and hopefully there's something in there that you can apply to the next time you're learning a new language or an accent. Goodbye. Cheerio. Auf Wiedersehen.